Change Your Life Through Love by Stella Terrill Mann. Part 4. How to Trust the Spirit of Love. Chapter 10. To Guide and Protect Loved Ones. My life would be all right if only I could do something to help my loved one, in the cry of many. Others say, how can I make my loved one do this or that? If we are looking for happiness and are convinced it can come to us only if some other person changes his way of life, reforms, treats us differently, lives after our pattern, we might as well give up. We have no moral right to make people over. God has decreed that each man has a right to find perfection and peace, divine love, in his own way, even if he makes mistakes and harms himself in doing so. We cannot too often remember that beyond a certain point, we dare not try to handle other people's lives. Our free will does not give us the authority to overcome our brother's free will. Our powers of exercising our free will end exactly at the spot where his begins. When we cross that line, we are taking liberties with another human soul, which God himself does not presume to do. Like Jesus, we should teach, demonstrate according to the law of love, set an example, help when called upon, but never try to usurp. This does not mean that we should not try to train young children, of course. When we feel the urge to lay down the law to someone dear to us or to someone who we feel is on the wrong path, we should pause and ask ourselves, why do we want to tell them what to do and how to do it? Because, comes the answer, and rather heatedly more likely than not, we do love them and we therefore know what is best for them. What manner of love is this? The love that Christ Jesus showed and said we should have for each other? Paul's love that seeketh not its own, is long-suffering and kind? Or is it a mixture of fear, a desire to fulfill the frustration in our own lives by dominating the life of another? Is it a downright distrust of God's ability and intention to handle the problem involved? We must get our reasoning straight before we can hope truly to help another. My way because it is best for you can become my way or die. No one is so perfect in love that he is capable of dominating the life of another. Free will is the gift of God. Any attempt to overcome it, imprison it in falsehoods, subdue and mislead it willfully for a selfish or evil purpose is a crime against man and an attempt to mock God. Any attempt to do it through good intentions is a distrust of the spirit of love, God, and shows lack of faith, wisdom, and love. Past wars between nations and between groups grew out of one interest trying to force its will upon another. Church and state have been equally guilty. This domination always fails eventually. Revolution overthrows tyrants forever because every man knows with an inherent wisdom that he was born free and has a right and a divine duty to exercise his will. Thus, children leave parents to start out for themselves. All of us resent unfair criticism and bondage, dislike being ordered about, and grow restive under restrictions. In the final analysis, the soul is ashamed, and we are irritated when we let another direct our lives, for we know it is our duty and privilege to direct them ourselves. How can we be sure our desire to help our loved one is motivated by good, by the very spirit of love, and not merely by our own fear or domination at work? There is one unfailing test. Are we unselfishly willing to pray as earnestly for the failure of our plan if it should not develop for the loved one's highest good, as we are to pray for its success if it is in his best interest? Are we willing to admit that it is entirely possible that our way is entirely wrong? If we are willing to leave the matter up to the divine mind for judging, then we can be sure we are honestly desirous of helping the loved one for his own good. But how shall we act once sure our desire is right? The way to help a loved one overcome his faults, find happiness, maintain and restore health, overcome any kind of problem, and be guided in any undertaking is to trust the spirit or intent of love and to work with it instead of against it. Love, we must remember, is the force which creates good and only good, and it always creates more good than existed before it set to work to promote the welfare of the beloved. The following example covers all the points of the procedure as I have successfully used it with others, regardless of what the person's problem may have been. It works equally well for healing, gambling, drinking, broken homes, and misunderstandings of all kinds. The key words in it are idolized for the readers after study. A man came to me greatly disturbed about his son who was breaking the hearts of those who loved him. He was especially breaking the heart of his young wife, whom the whole family loved. The son always had been a little restless, different from the other members of the family. He was critical. In school he had been ambitious and had bitterly resented his parents' poverty, which he felt prevented him from going to college. When his father pointed out the fact that thousands of fine young men worked their way through college, the son was angry. He was the youngest member of the family. Seems like Bill always wanted more than the others, never was satisfied with our lot in life. The family long had been church members, but the young man scoffed at it all, saying it had done them no good, had not improved their position in life. About 2 years before, the young man had married and was now the father of a baby son. Bill's grown so much worse since the baby came, said the father. I can't understand Bill. He loves the baby and his wife. I get so exasperated with him, I could shake him. With all the facts finally before me, I said, Bill is in open revolt against his present way of life, poverty and hard work. He, like most of the members of his generation, has been brought up on ideas of getting something better. The sellers of wares never let up on stimulating a prospective customer to buy, and they start out on the kindergarten group. Unless we know how to handle such stimulation and see our desires as a natural part of the law of progressive growth, refusing to be unduly urged, we are too likely to fall into the ditch where Bill has fallen. It is not Bill's desire for things of life which is causing the trouble, but the fact that he sees no way to acquire them. He knows nothing about his own inner powers, which, if developed, would bring him the things. His purpose is right. His discontent is divine. His idea of how to achieve what he desires for his wife, his child, and himself is wrong. That is what we must heal. The young man had lately taken to running around with some communistic talking friends and accepting their idea as a way of improving their own fortunes. Greatly disturbed, the father said, How can we make the boy see? I said, In effect, you are saying, Now God, I know you are pretty wonderful at solving most problems, but when it comes to my son Bill, you're just not big enough. You'd better let me handle this. And after a while, the man admitted that he had been thinking prayer wouldn't do no good. We can't make your son see what is right, I said. But his own Christ mind can remind him, present the true facts to him so clearly that he will see for himself what to do. He will then look to the universal spirit of love for help and not to men. He will then leave his ideas of spiritually illegal and will start to trust and to work with his desires within the law of all good for all men. But where do I come in? The father worried. By trusting the power of love and by working with it, I replied. This means that we are to bring our own desires, acts, and belief on behalf of Bill within the law of love. We are going to work with principles and not with Bill. If you actually believe there is a power higher than the power of God, the spirit of love and all good, then there is no use to try to work for your son. You will not help him. You will hinder him. But if you can accept as truth beyond all doubt and fear that there is a spirit of love throughout the universe which always has protected man in the past and always will aid all who call upon it, then you can help your son. Our first step in helping your son is to agree on that point. Can you agree? After a long time of talking, after much study on the man's part, and, as he said, revising considerable of his former ideas on the subject so that he would be sure he had stopped telling God what to do, the man came to the point of agreement. We then set to work with the process I mentioned in Jenny's story, that of placing a circle of love around the loved one. And this is how we did it. To the father I said, "We shall form a circle of love. It will be composed of our thoughts, feelings, desires, hopes, and positive knowledge of what is right for Bill. It will be intelligent, alive, and it will grow. It will be creative, for it is made of the same power which created man. It will come from our mind and heart, made up of our love of all good, and will include our honest desire to promote the welfare of Bill in such a way that it promotes the welfare of all other men as well. It will be made up of the best we have and know in our lives. We shall then place that circle of living love around Bill by our projected desire for his good. We shall set it into motion by our spoken word. Our word shall not return unto us void, but it will accomplish that which we desire it to do. Our word, being creative, will create after its kind." To all this the father desired to agree, and we worked back and forth with our thoughts about it until we could and did agree on all the points concerned. We then placed the circle by saying, "We have now placed a circle of love around you, Bill. No harm can come to you through it. No harm can go through it from you to another, for love rules your life." I further instructed, inside that circle we must see Bill as he goes about his daily work, and back of him we shall see his own Christ self, the man who he will eventually be when he has lived long enough and evolved toward truth or things as they are. We see back of him, towering above his small present mortal self, the purified man, the man who has been born again in Christ, the man in whom the Adam man has died and the Christ man been born. On all this we agreed. Now, as your son goes about his daily life, we see speaking to him and guiding him this Christ self, which we must always remember is the pattern of perfection toward which all men are striving. We hear the divine in your son speaking to the mortal in him. We see the mortal man listening. We see him turning from his way of fear and frustration to the way of love, truth, beauty, and righteousness. We see him turning to the paths of peace and plenty. We see him making his outer world after that inner perfect pattern. We see him doing this by bringing his every desire, act, and belief under the law of progressive good for all men, including himself. On all this we agreed, and we talked at great length about the reason our words were truth. I was trying to help the father bring his own consciousness up to the level of seeing truth. To the reader unfamiliar with truth of the New Thought interpretation of Jesus' teachings, this may seem a far-fetched, involved, or even mysterious method of helping a loved one. But the more advanced student will recognize it as Christ's method of teaching by parables. If the sufferer already knew how to use the principle, he would not be coming for help. I find I cannot help until I can raise the level of the understanding of the student to a point where he can grasp the principle. There may be a much better way of accomplishing this than I have found, but to date, I find the picture method works best. And this is just as true for the intelligent and well-educated as it was for Jenny. Her whole life was made over by just such a portrayal of principles. It does take a great deal of time, patience, and repeated effort, but once the student mentally grasps the law through pictures, it is his for life, and he can then use it at will. So it is worthwhile no matter how long it takes to teach him. If that father had continued to argue with his son, Bill would have gone more deeply into his own devices, for he already had lost all respect for his father's way of life as a means of accomplishing the material things he desired. Yet he had within himself that higher self, the Christ consciousness. In working with Bill silently, we did not need his consent, for we kept within his rights of free will. We did this by going above it, going directly to the highest law, God, that we always have the right and the duty to do. As the father and I worked in prayer for Bill, the father explained to his family as best he could what we were trying to do. They joined in. Soon after we had started to work, Bill said to his wife, "What's happened to you? You don't quarrel at me anymore." "Because I love you as you are," said his wife, meaning his inner self and not the frustrated, puzzled, fighting outer self. Before long, the young man noticed that none of the family criticized him, none blamed him. He did not know they were deliberately not seeing, not asking, not even advising him about his previous faults and attitudes, in spite of the fact that for a time those faults continued. With no one to argue with at home, the boy soon grew quieter. He could not do otherwise in that living, growing, glowing circle of love around him. All contention in the family, all fear, resentment, and argument ceased. They were behaving as if they already had received the answer to their prayers about Bill. One day Bill told his father he had an offer of a new job. He took it, left his labor union, stopped seeing his hot-headed communist friends, and before long stopped telling his father he was wrong about everything. A little later, he went into a small business venture for himself. After that, he made progress by leaps and bounds. One success brings another when we work with love. It is part of our study of the law of love to see how and why he succeeded. Going into business for himself restored his soul and righted his attitude towards others, since he had righted it toward himself. He began to build up self-confidence and self-pride of a good kind. He no longer felt secretly impotent and worthless. He was at last fulfilling the commandment to love thyself. When we began to see worth in Bill, we helped him to see worth in himself, to trust and work with love. Then it was not long before others began to see worth in Bill also. Through this avenue of love, he was able to acquire a small home with a very modest down payment. An elderly couple trusted him because they saw he had such faith in himself and was so devoted to his family. They sold him the little place they no longer needed. Their faith in him made a profound impression on the young man. By seeing the worth in others and the essence of their intent to do good, he began to trust love. With the acquisition of that little home, the change in Bill was simply astounding. He now had pride of ownership where he had once had shame of poverty. He loved his home and desired to promote this good. His whole attitude of destroying in order to receive, curbing others in order to gain for himself, changed to ways of constructive living through love. He now saw the necessity and desirability of protecting others and helping them to grow and to create. This new feeling about all life, all men, and the very nature of things or God began with loving himself. He no longer had to pretend he hated conditions, for he now knew a way to change conditions. With one real accomplishment to his credit, his faith increased tremendously. One day, when we felt Bill was well enough along with his new way of life, his father told him about our work. And Bill confessed he had felt the effect of that circle as something warm and safe around him that made him think in a way he never had thought before. He began to feel unafraid, to see he was going to solve his problems. One day he said, "Dad, you're a better Christian than I thought you were." This amazed his father, who thought Bill had renounced church and religion, while all the time he was actually looking for something more than he had found in religion so far. Bill did not go back to his old way. He had turned within for a power that always had been there, waiting to be called upon. When we learn to take our desires to the creative power of the universe, we do not feel the need of clubs in hand, the organized force of men, for we find love, the desire for good for all, to be the greater power of all. We discover the fact that our desire was implanted in us so that we would make an effort to satisfy it, and by that effort grow. We learn eventually to trust love. But how much better it would be and how much faster we'd travel if we set out by trusting love in the first place. To help our loved one, there's only one thing you can do in safety, and that is to help him become aware of his own inner power. He does not have to rely on your power. You assert your influence by raising your own consciousness of love, by trusting it farther than you can possibly see to guide, protect, and help that loved one. The best way to keep hands off and let love do the work is to place that living, growing, glowing circle of love around him. The more visual and real you can make it in your own mind, the more quickly you will raise the level of your consciousness. Give your circle of love a color. I prefer gold, for it is easily seen. See your circle composed of tiny particles as of mist or fog. See it ever spreading out and around your loved one. If you are trying to bring a loved one home, as was Jenny, then place yourself in the center of the circle. See it as expanding into an ever larger circle of love, ever alive and growing until it encompasses the world if necessary. Then know that it will find that loved one and begin by love, not willpower or force, to draw him to you. In using the circle for the uplift and protection of a loved one, you must see him inside the circle, being talked to by his highest self rather than by you. Never picture yourself or anyone else as using force with your loved one. If you will use the circle of living love to help your loved one, you will find your worries and fears about him will fall far from you like a discarded cloak. You need to liberate him. Your apprehensions and scoldings will hold him down exactly as if you had submerged him in water. As long as you fear for him, you are setting forces into motion to make those fears come true after their kind. When you rise in your own consciousness and really trust love, you broadcast that fact to him, for thoughts about a loved one are projected at a tremendous rate of vibration. You feel intently about him. Loving him, you cannot do otherwise. He is in tune with you, even though you may seem to differ on all opinions about life and affairs. He hears your belief. He reacts to it. And the lower he is in estimation of himself, the more he will believe and react to your most strongly held and projected opinions about him. So do not criticize. Look with the eyes of love. Listen and speak with love. Do not agonize about all the dreadful things that might happen when he is on an airplane or automobile trip, for example. Bring all your thoughts about him under love. Bring all your desires, acts, and faith under love. Do not look for the worst. Look for and believe in the best. Withdraw all thoughts, even your prayers, until you can begin to trust love. Let your prayer for yourself and your loved one be, God, I thank thee for increased wisdom and love. Then you will be thinking about him with the mind of love. Then you will be trusting love, which means trusting God's earnest desire to promote the welfare of your loved one and of yourself as well. It is when we trust God fully that we are able to build a circle composed of our thoughts, words, and beliefs about love. In this way, we go to the Father that is in our loved one, reminding him to go to the Father of us all. We thus urge his mortal self to listen to his divine immortal self. If you are keeping notes and making use of the affirmations so far given, add this to them. God loves him, and he loves God. God speaks to him, and he listens. God directs, and he follows. And I am grateful that this is so. In using it, mention the name of your loved one. Then cast all sense of burden from your own mind and heart. You do not have to do the work. It is done for you. End of chapter. All right, my dear one, please do hit that like button. If you like what you hear and what you see here, please do subscribe, share this with your friends, and let's head over to the next video where we continue with this book in chapter titled To Lead You to Paradise.